Welcome to our public meeting. This is the Upper Guadalupe Flood Risk Management General Reevaluation Study. I was going to note to everybody that we have our contact information there, upperguadalupe@usace.army.mil. So if you want to continue to be informed about the progress of our project, please drop us an email, provide your name, any affiliation and contact details, and we'll have some information come back to you on a mailing list. Let's move on to slide 2. So this is just a quick overview of what we're doing tonight. We're going to, the Corps and Valley Water will be presenting an update about the Upper Guadalupe River Flood Risk Management Project. We have a partially constructed project and authorized plan, but there have been some updates which we will share today. We want to explain why we are doing this study and how this project will move forward. The purpose of this meeting is to hear from you, and we want your input. Your participation is an invaluable part of the planning process, which we will go over. This is the first of many steps where we will help you stay informed and engage in the study. This presentation is planned to go on for about 30 minutes. There'll be a time in between for some exercises, and at the end of the presentation, opportunity to provide comments and ask questions. Next slide. So this is our general agenda for this evening. We're going to do some opening comments, and then we're going to move on to the presentation and discuss some ground rules so that we can honor everybody's time and ensure everyone has the opportunity to provide comments and feedback. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Tonight we're honored to have Director Barbara Keegan from District 2. She's with the Valley Water's Board of Directors. Her district includes large portions of the city of San Jose, including neighborhoods adjacent to the Upper Guadalupe River. She has served on the board since her election in 2012 and has been a strong supporter of the Army Corps of Engineers through the years. Please welcome Director Barbara Keegan. Over to you, Director Keegan.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that introduction. And good evening, everyone. And thanks to all of you who are joining us this evening. Or perhaps you may be watching this presentation as it's being recorded for your benefit, so you can watch it in another time at your convenience. I'm really very happy to be part of this virtual meeting and to be supporting our longtime partners, the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So Valley Water has worked hard over the years to protect our communities across Santa Clara Valley from flooding for many, many years. The partnership with the Army Corps on the Upper Guadalupe River Flood Protection Risk Management Project is a great example of the good things that can happen when you work together. And actually, my relationship with the Corps and Guadalupe River goes back even farther to the 1980s when I was a young engineer with the city of San Jose, and the Lower Guadalupe project was being done in conjunction with the city of San Jose, Valley Water, and the Corps of Engineers. So it was exciting to see that project get finished, and I look forward to the opportunity to move forward with the Upper Guadalupe project. Back in 2012, Valley Water and the Corps completed flood management work from Interstate 280 to Blossom Hill Road along the sections of the Upper Guadalupe River known as Reaches 6, 10B, and 12. These are really great accomplishments that we have been able to work together on. But unfortunately, funding at the federal level has not come as fast as we would like, and that's resulted in a reevaluation of our work. That's part of the reason we're here tonight. That means that the project has to be paused until the study is completed. But with your help, we can get this important project back on track. The general reevaluation study for the remaining sections that need to be finished is vital to getting the entire Upper Guadalupe River work funded and completed. And that's something I know that we are all interested in seeing happening. It's a very long road ahead, but the work will be worth it. Should this project be able to move forward, our communities in San Jose along the Upper Guadalupe River will be safer from the threat of floods. And make no mistake, floods remain a concern even as all of us maneuver through the current and extreme drought. In fact, I'd really like to take this opportunity to encourage all of you to conserve water and take advantage of Valley Water's rebate programs that can be found at www.valleywater.org. Remember that every drop saved today is one available for tomorrow. And in conclusion, I'd like to thank again the U.S. Army Corps for their leadership in this effort on the Upper Guadalupe River. Valley Water, both as the elected officials and our staff, look forward to a continuing strong partnership for the benefit of all. So thank you very much to Michael and his team, and I will turn the meeting back to you and the Army Corps. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Director Keegan. I appreciate your support and the ongoing support of your team. I'd just like to make a couple brief introductions. I'm just going to call out by name Rochelle Blank. She's the Deputy Operating Officer, and Carl Newman. He's the Engineering Unit Manager. This is the project management team from Valley Water, and they're online tonight. And we're going to move on to opening remarks from our commander. Can you advance the slide? So let me just make a brief introduction. Lieutenant Cunningham is the commander at San Francisco District. He's been serving with the U.S. Army since he was commissioned in 2002. Prior to commanding San Francisco District, Colonel Cunningham served as the Deputy Commander of Portland District. I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael, and Director Keegan. Thanks for your great introduction. This is an important effort, and I'll confess this is my last night in the district, and so this is probably my last official public engagement, and I can't think of a better way to spend my last night in the Bay Area than on this important effort and really seeking your input as we shape the future of this. So the Corps has been working on this system, the Guadalupe River, for a long time. Including Sacramento District, had done a construction effort back in 2005. We partially constructed the Upper Guadalupe project from 2009 to 18, as Director Keegan mentioned. And we've done a lot of study work in this. So this is not a new effort. We've got a great foundation to build off of. We have a fantastic partner here in Valley Water, and we've been working closely with City of San Jose, the resource agencies, including Fish and Wildlife Service, the EPA, San Jose Airport Authority, Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, and local tribes, among many others. And so all of the voices are very important to make sure we get to an ideal and optimal solution for the problems we're facing in the area. Through this partnership, we've engaged with the community a number of times, and it's very important now that we hear your voice as we look to shape what alternatives we look at, and we'll explain the process tonight. So we're certainly seeking your input. This is a reformulation study. Again, there's a lot of work that's been done. This is necessary to inform or adjust the remaining project and address the issues that we've identified during the design phase. It's a complex study. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of potential alternatives out there. We're bringing in, I want to just maybe communicate, give you confidence, we're bringing in the most cutting edge experts that the Corps has to offer. So we've got a strong team. Valley Water brings the experience and a deep understanding of this watershed and the local community. And so we've got the right team to solve this problem. Thank you for coming today, or thank you for watching this recording. We look forward to your input, so please do provide that. And thank you. Back over to you, Michael, for the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate kind words about this project and your continued support. I know it may be from afar, but I appreciate your support. Thank you. I'd just like to go through just who makes up, I guess, some of the main players on the USACE team. So tonight, I'm Michael Mercado. I'm the project manager. I've been assigned to the project manager working this very interesting and challenging project. Daria Mazie, she's going to be briefing tonight. She's our lead planner for this effort. And then I have also working the environmental side of this project, Ann Baker and Julie Beagle. So they'll also be presenting this evening. And let me turn it over now to Daria. She's going to go through some ground rules and how we're going to proceed with our meeting this evening.
Thanks, Michael. And I can't help but point out that our environmental co-leads coordinated their outfits, and we are all in lockstep. So I'll get going. You know, we're in a virtual world these days, and whether you're watching this at home after the meeting or calling in now, we have the benefits of technology, but also, you know, we don't get to have sidebar conversations in person. But this is the world that we are in now, and so I just want to go over kind of our ground rules. If you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat box. You can access that if you click on the bottom right corner of your WebEx and click chat. That opens up your chat box, and then you can type in things for everyone to hear, or you can do a private chat to the host if you prefer. And I just wanted to say, you know, even if it's positive feedback, even if you like what you're hearing and you just think, okay, they're on track, that's the kind of feedback that is also valuable to us. It helps us know that we're on the right track, or if there's something that has particular public support. Those are things that our decision makers are also interested in. And as Michael put in the chat, you can also continue to be informed on our progress by following the website or contacting us at Upper Guadalupe at usace.army.mil to become part of our contact list. So comments entered into the chat box will be considered formal written comments and be part of the project record. Similarly, with any comments that you email to us or speak verbally, we'll take notes and that will become part of the project record. We'll try to answer your questions tonight, but we will also respond to them in a NEPA scoping document and respond to all comments. So if you do wish to make a verbal comment or ask a question verbally, please hold those till the end of the presentation. And then you can use the hand raise icon to request to speak, and we'll call on you when it's your turn. And if you want to access that hand raise icon, look to the bottom of your WebEx. There's a little smiley face with a plus sign on their forehead or temple. And if you click on that, you're able to raise your hand. So I just raised my hand. If you go to the participant list, which is right next to that chat box list, you'll see I have a hand raised. And then after someone calls on me, I can lower my hand using that same button. And during the presentation, please stay on mute unless you are called on or invited to come off of mute for discussions and questions. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that all federal projects and work and documentation, including info that you put in about comments or yourself, are subject to the Freedom of Information Act public record. So don't put anything into the chat that you are uncomfortable having be part of the public record. So I wanted to give us an opportunity to learn the annotation feature of the WebEx because we do have some interaction planned for this evening. So if you go to the left bar of the WebEx and mouse over that, you should get a little squiggly line that looks like this here. And if you click on that, you'll get an annotation bar, which you should be able to see on the slide now. And there's a pencil option. You can choose a pencil, which has a pointier end, or the pen, and you can even change the color of it if you like. And then you can use that to make check marks on some of these slides. There's also a big and a little T. You can use that to write. So I thought we could play around a little bit with the annotation tool now. So I invite people to try out this tool. Thank you. I see some people doing it. I'll give folks a few more seconds if they want to try their artistic hand, you know, draw a little picture of a river, some birds, maybe a steelhead trout. Do we have any biologists, fish biologists out there? All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, so we are going to try some new technology and open a poll to see, do you remember the last flood on the Guadalupe River is the first question. And can I get a thumbs up if people can see this poll and can take it? Okay, great. Thanks, Savannah. All right. I have about 7 people who haven't started the poll yet, so I'm going to give you guys a little more time in case you want to jump in. And feel free to go on to the next question also, which is, what brings you to this meeting? Sorry, that's how do you identify it, kind of what's your interest? And then we are going to get to number 3 later in the presentation, but you can feel free to answer that as well now, and then Anne will inform us kind of more about what all of these things mean later. So we've got about 8 more seconds. Any of the 5 people who haven't participated yet, quickly enter your input. All right, thank you so much. So I am going to, people are submitting their responses. You got to click submit. And then got about 5 more seconds left to do that. All right, great. Okay. So, 4 out of 16 respondents said that they do remember the last flood, and 7 out of 16 said that they did not, and 5 out of 16 did not answer. So there is some memory in the collective memory in this group of flooding. I don't know if it's recent or not, but a lot of people don't. And that's actually not a surprising answer, because flooding, especially large events, you know, if we're lucky, they don't happen very frequently. They may not even happen while you live in a neighborhood, but that doesn't mean that there's not a risk of it on any given day occurring. And so it's important that we, as the Corps and Valley Water, you know, help to communicate that risk so that we can all be ready, and also try to manage that risk through efforts such as these. So, and now we are going to close this poll, and I'll invite folks for another participation to just say what brings you to this meeting. You can use your little name bar if you like, or you can circle something or make a check mark near it. Environmental. All right, great. Okay, and flooding. All right, thanks everybody. Oh, I got one recreation. Okay. So I wanted to give some background on how we got here. And, you know, Director Keegan, maybe she didn't see my slides, but she totally scooped me and hit all the major points already. And then Colonel Cunningham did too. But still, I'll go through these briefly, maybe not as expertly, because I was not involved in some of the earlier efforts as a young engineer. I'm new, but there's a long history here. So in 1999, Congress authorized the bypass plan, which was a plan analyzed in the 1998 feasibility report, and they authorized that for construction. And that's because, you know, we had identified that there was a risk of flooding in the upper Guadalupe River and the tributaries, which are Ross and Canoas Creeks. And it was the same partners, the Corps of Engineers and Valley Water. We completed a study, and the project was initiated to help manage this risk. And then, like Director Keegan said, funding was not consistent, and so there was some delays, and in 2007, Congress reauthorized the plan, but there was still some inconsistent funding. But then, starting in 2009, we did kick off both the design and construction going from 2009 to 2018, and reaches 6, 10B, and 12 are completed. But during this design phase, some concerns were identified for the remaining unconstructed project reaches. And basically, the water in the channel is moving very, very quickly, and we determined that this was going to be a problem and continue to erode the banks. And the cost to address this problem under the existing project was very high, and maybe exceeded the benefits. And so that is why the reformulation study was initiated, so that we could answer this, basic question, kind of boiling it down. How can we meet the project objectives consistent with Corps of Engineers policies and guidelines? And like some others noted, the constructed work in 10B and 12, a lot of that was actually plantings to improve aquatic habitat as mitigation, or basically what we do when we want to offset some of the environmental impacts that would be expected from the planned construction should it have been completed. So zooming back out again to kind of the project area, we are on a computer, but our project is located in Santa Clara County in the southwest portion of the city of San Jose, which is a highly urbanized part of the Santa Clara Valley. And the Guadalupe River is the second largest stream in Santa Clara County, and it discharges into San Francisco Bay approximately 20 miles north of the origin, which is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the watershed the Guadalupe River drains an area of approximately 170 square miles. And the lower watershed consists primarily of residential and commercial usage, with some limited industrial and agricultural. And the upper watershed is still mostly undeveloped land. And our project area is about 5.5 miles long on the main stem between the Southern Pacific Railroad Bridge and the Blossom Hill Road Bridge. And it also includes 2 tributaries which frequently overtop their banks, and those are Ross and Canoas Creeks. So here is another exercise where you can put your screen box or annotate and say, where do you live or work, or what areas concern you? I'm going to say. So go ahead and participate if you wish. All right. Some people are interested in parks. Some people are interested in Ross Creek or Canoas Creek. I see someone interested in a bridge here. Great. Thank you so much. A couple people are interested in the whole area. All right. Okay, so I just wanted to explain what a reformulation study is. It can also be called a general reevaluation. And these studies are basically to affirm or reformulate or modify a plan or portions of a plan under the current planning criteria. And the output or deliverable for this will be a general reevaluation report, which will summarize all of the work that we do to hopefully come up with a recommendation. And for this study, the primary authorized purposes are flood risk management and recreation improvements. However, we are planning to comprehensively look at all of the benefits as we compare and select a plan. And that includes environmental quality benefits, or things that, affect society in other ways, which we call other social effects. And this is going to inform the plan comparison and selection. So this is a flood risk management study with recreation, so that's what we're going to try to formulate for, but we'll look at it holistically before we make a selection. And these photos are from the 1995 flood. And I like to include photos like this because I feel like, especially when the majority of folks in this meeting don't remember the last flood. I certainly don't. I wasn't there. But when I see these photos, I see, why we're here today. All right, and so with that, I'm going to pass it over to our environmental co-lead, Julie Beagle.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to take us back a lot earlier in history now because I think it's really important to understand how we got to the state that we're in at the landscape scale. So historically, the river looked a lot different than it does now. And this is a map from 1879, which is really showing us the headwaters of what used to be called the Guadalupe River, which was actually near the Willow Glen neighborhood, farther towards the bay than our study is today. And it started in a willow grove, which is why the neighborhood is called Willow Glen. And you can see that in the yellow blob on the map. Further to the south, and it's off this map, the Arroyo Seco de Guadalupe used to diffuse into many, many channels. It spread into marshes, into other willow groves, and it didn't join up with this, what we call the Guadalupe River today, until many decades later. So if you can go to the next slide, Daria. So by the turn of the 20th century, a canal had been created to connect that historical Guadalupe River, which I just showed you, in the south with the Arroyo Seco de Guadalupe in the north, and create what we now call the Guadalupe River. And you can see in blue on this map on the left the roots of those historical channels that diffused and spread and disconnected. And in white, underneath, you can see the connections that we humans made as we settled and drained this part of San Jose. So on the top right of this slide, you can see a conceptual drawing of what that channel, that historical channel, might have looked like back in the 1800s. So it was a pretty shallow channel. If you stood on the banks, it would have been just a few feet down, steps down to the bottom of the riverbed. So as we connected those streams and canaled and ditched all of those creeks, we steepened their course, we sped up that water. We funneled all that water into those channels, which caused them to erode, to dig down. And that's what you see now, steep eroding banks, as Daria was describing before, and a channel in that bottom right corner that if you stand on the banks, the channel bottom is 25 to 30 feet below you. So go to the next slide, please. And this is a map just comparing the historical study area to the modern study area. So on the right, you can see a full map of that area. The blues and the greens on this map on the right are those marshes, those willow groves, those wet depressions where the channel would have spread out and slow down. On the left, in the blue lines, you can see those simplified stream channels today. So for example, in our project reaches 7 and 8, which is the top arrow, the top red arrow, were ditched. That's that white line that I showed you before to connect the historical creek around that willow grove. Canoas and Ross Creeks, the middle arrows, didn't used to connect to the river at all, but now they do. And I'm showing you this just to point out that all of this historical modifications has really impacted the ability of this channel to hold, to convey water, and that really helps us understand where we see the flooding and why we see the flooding that we do, which Daria will show you on the next slide. Daria, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. That was really interesting. So this slide talks about the existing flood hazard. And the flooding shown in this draft map is the 1% annual exceedance probability event, which is the flood that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. Some people refer to it as a 100-year event. We at the Corps have tried to move away from that because it gives people a sense that, hey, it only happens every 100 years, but actually you could have two 1% annual chance exceedance events back to back in 1 year after another. So it's just statistics and luck, right? And our preliminary results indicate that the flows break out of the channel in several locations on both sides, as well as in Ross and Canoas Creek. And the flows move through the floodplain downstream, so from bottom to top here. And the preliminary results indicate that much of the depth of flooding or inundation depth are relatively shallow, between 0 and 3 feet, except in some areas that are shown in darker blue on the map where you have some deeper depths. And the hydraulic model setup and results described here and on this map are still drafts and subject to further edits and updates pending some reviews that we have coming up. But we wanted to include this draft info to let you know sort of what we're working in to help convey the problem and the risks that we're all talking about, even though it's not quite final. So I think it's important to talk about, what's likely to happen if there is no federal project, and this slide just captures some of the main concerns or things that are part of that future without project condition is our technical term. So flood risk will remain, including a life safety risk to people living in encampments along the river, and the steelhead trout populations may continue to decline without a project due to constricted channel with high velocities, erosion, and incision, as well as the presence of invasive species in the area. And we think that recreation opportunities or access to the river corridor and green space in this area might experience some minor improvements over time without a project, but anything that would require major channel modifications is unlikely without a federal and cost-shared project here. And the significant erosion issues already occurring in many reaches will remain due to the high velocity in the channel. So here is another exercise. And I know most of our meeting today is government employees, so maybe this isn't as meaningful. But for those of you watching on your computers, if a pre-recorded video, hopefully you see yourself here or in the other. Yeah, thank you for the government agency one. We do have some call-in users, so if you are not with a government agency and you missed the part of the presentation where we taught you how to annotate, mouse over to the left of your screen, and there's a little squiggly line, and you can click on that, and then you can select a pen or a pencil or an arrow bar tool and check the box that most apply. All right, I'm going to move on. Oh, we have a local homeowner, yay, and a local resident, yay. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay, great. So this colorful slide is a summary of the problems, opportunities, objectives, constraints, and considerations that the study team, with some input from resource agencies and the City of San Jose, have drafted. And I won't read all of them, but basically, we have a flood risk problem. We have lack of public access and recreation. We've already spoken sort of at length about the high velocities and the impacts of those. But we do recognize an opportunity to realize some benefits to environmental quality potentially, to improve that access, potentially reduce channel maintenance requirements and costs. The objectives of the study are to reduce flood risk to the surrounding communities and also increase access to the green space along the river. Excuse me. And we are working in a channel, and we're going to talk about this more later, but we're working in a channel that has some threatened steelhead fish in it, which are listed under the Endangered Species Act. And so we cannot cause unacceptable, unmitigable impacts to threatened or endangered species. And, as part of our construction, we will be applying for permits with regulatory agencies, resource agencies, and our construction schedule will be constrained based on those permits. And we've identified a number of considerations, 20 of them, too many to list here, but some of the highlighted ones are We do know that there are a number of encampments along the river with people living in them, and so that is something that we need to consider as part of the study. And there is mercury in many of the soils in the area, which needs to be considered in terms of cost of construction and safety. This is not, the Corps of Engineers does not have a cleanup mission, so we can't clean up that as part of this study, but it's something that we definitely take into consideration and look at. Okay, so this is our next exercise where we invite you to type into the chat or use your annotation bar. There are users in the meeting whose organization policy doesn't allow them to participate in the chat. Okay, so if you can't participate in the chat, now is a time where I invite people to come off of mute. We have a small meeting, so I think it won't be too hectic. So if you want to speak up, I can type things in or put things into the chat or use your annotation T bars to write in some concerns, and they won't show up until you click away from it. So I'll give folks a minute or two to participate in this exercise. All right, so if you are typing, maybe click away so that I know that you're working on some input. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay. All right, so we brainstormed measures as part of our effort to develop alternatives to address our objectives. And overall, we brainstormed 36 measures for initial consideration. And I'm not going to read all of these. You can see them here. But I do want to highlight that we have structural measures and non-structural measures. What we mean by that, so non-structural are measures that the flooding still occurs. You don't change where the water goes, but the damages don't occur or are reduced because you, say, flood-proof your house, so you don't get damage from the water, or you elevate your house, or you relocate people out of the floodplain, or you evacuate people, so you do a flood warning system so that unhoused people know to evacuate in the case of a flood and don't drown because the waters are rising rapidly and they are sleeping. Then we also have structural measures, things like setback levees, detention basins, flood walls. Those are things that change the hydrology, change the way water flows to prevent the flooding from occurring in a given location where you're trying to prevent it from occurring. So that's how we define structural measures. It can be a little confusing because things like house raising seems like a structural thing because you're raising a structure, but from Corps of Engineers definitions, we call that non-structural. We also have this other category called natural and nature-based features, or we like to use an acronym for everything, so we also call them NNBF. But natural and nature-based features, these ones are all structural measures as well, but we give them this separate designation because they function a little differently than some of the traditional flood risk management features in that they mimic natural environment features that have a flood protective capacity. So basically, if you have a floodplain and you reconnect it and you allow the water to go there, then it can reduce the risk from flooding, but it can also provide other environmental quality benefits and help the river function more the way it naturally wants to. So natural and nature-based features are kind of characterized for having more environmental quality benefits and sometimes have lower maintenance because they can kind of adaptively manage and build. Like if you have a big flood and a bunch of vegetation is taken out, it can regenerate and grow on its own. Whereas if you have a big flood and a flood wall is damaged, you have to go back and fix it, and that's more expensive. So, but they can also be more expensive to build. So anyway, Julie is going to go into these a little bit more, and I think I may have stolen your thunder a little bit on some of them. I'm sorry, Julie.
I loved it. I loved it, Daria. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on some of those three categories that Daria just talked about, just so we have a visual of what we're thinking about. So this is a few of those traditional structural measures that Daria mentioned. Some of those include things like flood walls, crib walls, you can see in the top pictures, levees, bypass channels. There's a little diagram of what that means. It actually diverts water into a fully separate channel, things like detention ponds. And as Daria was saying, the benefits of these are that they do lower flood risk. They're containing the water in the channel. They take less space, so a flood wall is very narrow. A levee can be, has a width, but they often can be done within an urban environment. It's important to point out the impacts of some of these. As you can see in those walls and crib walls, there's not a lot of habitat availability. They're really disconnecting the channel from the adjacent land. So less habitat availability, less public access. It's very hard to climb over a flood wall and get down into the channel. And they're not adaptable. They're fixed in their height and their location. So there's just things to consider when we're thinking about traditional structural measures that we are all more familiar with. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of natural and nature-based features, as Daria was just pointing out. They can be things like bank setbacks, floodplain benches, reconnecting the channel to the floodplain, and also things like replanting vegetation along the stream bank to kind of jumpstart the process of the riparian forest. The benefits here, as Daria was saying, include improved habitat, improved complexity in the river channel. They really do give the river more room, and that is the point of them. They lead to slower moving water because it can spread out and slow down, which is what it did historically. That type of process, reconnecting the channel to the floodplain, does that jump-starting of restarting the riparian forest. So it would increase the ability of the channel to grow its own plants. And you can get down to the river. If your banks aren't as steep, that leads to more access. There are impacts. So if you are going to sculpt a bank and move a channel back, you would have a short-term loss of the riparian forest in that location until it was able to grow back. They take space. It really is allowing the river to spread out. Sometimes we have that space and sometimes we don't. Often they can cost more on the front end. They're less familiar to many. And so there's just things to consider. On the right is a diagram of 3 stages of this type of process. So the top image you can see is what our current channel looks like. Steep banks, 1 or 2 trees on the top of those banks, and maybe riprap in the channel. In the middle diagram, that's showing what a bank setback or a floodplain bench creation could look like around the time of construction. So you would lose some of that riparian cover. You would replant on the benches and at the top of the bank. And then the third image at the bottom shows what that looks like as it grows in. So it's a wider, it's a more complex channel. There's a floodplain, happier fish, and ideally people can get down and engage with the river. Next slide, please. Daria mentioned non-structural measures. These are really important in core projects and can be part of this array of alternatives that we'll talk about next. Those include things like flood warning systems, evacuation plans, risk communication around flooding, retrofits to buildings, as Daria was talking about, changes to land use. And some of the benefits are that they, as Daria was saying, require less maintenance and can be adaptable to changing conditions. And so if flooding starts to occur more, these types of plans can be updated, and there's less residual risk often because they're not fixed in place. There are impacts. This leads to changes in how the community functions, and it can change the cost burden to local partners. So again, part of this process is thinking through all types of measures that may be applicable to this river and then figuring out how we combine them into a plan. And that's what Daria is going to talk about next.
Thanks, Julie. So we brainstormed our measures, and then we want to combine them into what we call alternatives, which is basically a combination of 2 or more measures. And we try to identify strategies for developing these alternatives and think through, you know, what could be some interesting combinations. And so these, in this blue box on the left, you see all the different strategies that we engaged as we developed and are now refining our alternatives. So things like, how can we create a self-mitigating project or a self-sustaining channel? How can we maximize ecosystem or environmental quality outputs? Focusing on ways that improve life safety, varying the scale and costs of the measures, as well as, you know, how do we keep water from the places that it will cause damage? So those are some of the strategies that we used. All right, so now we have another exercise, and we are getting towards the end of our presentation and close to our Q&A and discussion, but I know we do have a small group, so, you know, feel free to come off mute. You can add your notes to the chat again, or use your annotation tool, the squiggly line on the left. Or if you need some time to process and think through, you can also email the project delivery team at Upper Guadalupe at usace.army.mil. That goes for people who are watching this later on the web. Feel free to send us your comments and questions, and we will get back to you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so what else should we consider? Do you have any questions or comments on these alternatives or measures? Including, looks good to me. That works too. But all right, I am not seeing any participation in the chat. I'm not hearing anyone come off of mute. So I am going to go ahead and keep this moving and pass it over to Ann Baker, who is the Regional Technical Specialist for the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and who's going to explain her area of expertise. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Daria. Yes, part of the reason that we're holding this meeting is because of compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, which we call NEPA, which is kind of the overarching environmental regulation that requires us to look at the potential effects of federal actions. So, for a brief overview of what the process looks like, this is kind of the steps we go through. We kind of define what the baseline or existing conditions in the project area are. We evaluate the alternatives under consideration and how those alternatives would change or affect those existing conditions in the area. We take a look at the effects of the alternatives on a number of different environmental resources, which can kind of fall into these 3 categories: environmental or ecological effects, urban effects, you know, that like noise in your backyard, that kind of thing, and also cultural and historic effects, because, you know, a lot of like historically tribal cultures, you know, migrated to the rivers primarily and lived along the rivers, so there tends to be a high number of archaeological resources along rivers. So in addition to looking at the effects of our alternatives, we also would identify any benefits. Like in the case of a flood risk management project, there is public safety benefits. And in the case of this specific project, we're also authorized to take a look at potential recreation opportunities along the river. So that's another area where we could see benefits from this project. Once we've kind of outlined and written up what all of the effects and benefits of our actions are, we would also define any measures that we would have to take to minimize or compensate for those effects. And also delineate kind of how we comply with the other federal environmental laws that sometimes you hear more about, like the Endangered Species Act or the Clean Water Act, things like that. But in addition to all of that analysis, we're also required to talk to you guys. we're required to, go out to the public, tell you about what we're thinking, ask you for input, and all of that input that we could get really just helps us in the long run, helps us to know where to focus our energy, where, what we need to account for. So, this is a really, almost, I would say, the most important part of the whole process. So after we go through all of that analysis, we write it up into a report which we'll release for public review as part of this whole evaluation study process. Next slide. So I mentioned the 3 different types of effects that we have. So when we're talking about biological or ecological environmental effects, in the case of this study, we're really talking about, kind of the specific impacts to the river, the vegetation impacts, water quality impacts. As Daria mentioned a minute ago, we've got some threatened and endangered fish species in this river, including primarily steelhead trout. So, steelhead trout this river is very critical for their recovery, and even though we have very, intermittent kind of limited vegetative cover, the value of that cover is really high because there's so little of it. So, and that vegetation is really, really important for the fish because it both regulates the water temperature, keeps the water temperatures cool, and also provides food and habitat complexity for the fish. So any vegetation loss that could occur from the project would have to be replaced as part of project implementation. Next slide. Thank you. Then I mentioned, archaeological resources, cultural resources. So one of the federal environmental laws that we're required to comply with is the National Historic Preservation Act, which defines a process for evaluating effects to historic properties, such as prehistoric sites, historic sites, buildings, structures, objects, burials, artifacts. We go through this process of reviewing kind of the existing knowledge of what could be out there by the river, and also, try to collect additional historic information through consultations with both local Native American tribes and also the State Historic Preservation Officer. As a note, we have already initiated consultation with a number of tribes, the 8 tribes listed here on this page. So that is already in progress, and we will ensure that the project is addressing any potential effects to historic properties as part of the measures. Next slide, please. I mentioned urban considerations. This is kind of the stuff that I think more directly impacts people in a lot of ways. So this is, are we going to be altering the visual character, the aesthetic character of the area around the river because of our project? Is our construction equipment going to be polluting the air? Is there going to be noise from our construction? This is where we'll talk about, the changes to the recreation, if we end up, being able to incorporate any recreation opportunities. We talk about any changes we might make to land use or zoning, any traffic that might be a part of our project implementation, things along those lines. So these are, all of these are very, there's a very wide range of things that we're going to be looking at as part of the NEPA process. Next slide. So we have another activity, I'm sure. So in this case, what we wanted to know is, since part of the goal of this project is to consider opportunities for recreation features, we're curious if you currently have any interaction with the river. Do you currently walk along the river? Is it, you know, in your backyard? I would assume you're not swimming in it, but if you're swimming in it, tell us that. And also any ideas you might have for how you'd like to use the river in the future, like what kind of recreation features would you like to see? Are you interested in, you know, bike trails to help you commute along the river, or walking trails? Are you interested in bird watching? Are you like, you know, how would you like to use the river in the future? And then also, you know, I just went through a whole long laundry list of environmental considerations, and we'd love to hear what of those environmental considerations you think should be our priorities. If you have specific concerns, specific impacts that are untenable to you, or that you would like to see us try to avoid, any of that. If you want to mark it up, love to hear. I love that we're seeing some stuff on this. Yay! Everyone wants trails. And thank you, Daria, for that reminder. If you know, please don't hesitate to send us an email at upperguadalupe@usace.army.mil, which we have in both the chat and on the screen. This is where, you know, if you think of something later, if you have any suggestions for us, we'd love to hear about your thoughts. And, you know, that inbox will, I mean, pretty much go straight to me. So please send me an email. Observe natural features. I love that. Yes.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to come off of mute, you may need to press *6 to come off of mute, or you might be able to do it through the mute button on your WebEx. And we can invite that now at this time too. But thank you for all of the great use of annotations. That people want safer trails, they want trails, they currently walk and run on trails, and someone is interested in observing natural features. We have some concerns about encampments along the river. Okay. Want me to go to the next slide in?
Yeah, I just wanted to give people a sec. I know I was kind of rambling, so filling in the silence with my awkward voice. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and move on.
All right, great.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate that. So moving forward, we just wanted to give you an idea of how, what to expect from us moving forward. So this is kind of a preliminary or a high-level list of dates, important dates for us moving forward. Right now, you see the little black arrow, that's where we are right now. Public scoping, agency coordination. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to be taking all of the input that we receive from you, from the other federal agencies, from the city of San Jose, and we're gonna you know, assess all of that input and use that input to kind of evaluate and screen kind of the preliminary list of measures and alternatives that we showed you guys earlier in the presentation. We'll then kind of go through another round of alternative evaluation and refinement with a goal of getting to what we call our tentatively selected plan, in which we would identify in the fall and then ideally confirm, or not confirm, but formalize around the end of the calendar year. So then that leads us down to the star and the bold at the bottom there. That is our estimated release of our draft report. So we'll have a draft, what we've been calling the general reevaluation report. That's the planning report that Daria is going to be leading. and it's going to be integrated with the draft NEPA report that myself and Julie are leading, and we're aiming to get that out on the street in the spring of next year. And that'll give everybody an opportunity to review and comment on our work. Let us know again if you have any, ideas for us, any suggestions, concerns. And then we'll take that input and assess it in order to confirm that our tentatively selected plan should actually become our recommended plan. So that's our time frame moving forward. That's when you should expect to hear from us again. If you, again, I'll say, please, if you want to receive a link to that report directly to you when we release it in the spring, please send us an email to Upper Guadalupe at usace.army.mil, and we will add you to our distribution list, and so that you get a shiny notification when that's ready. Yes, next slide, please. And our last exercise, everybody. So this is kind of us looking to sum up the input from you guys. Did you hear anything from us that you liked today? Go ahead and, type it on into the chat or into the column there, or come off of mute and tell us. Did we miss something? Is there something that you didn't hear us mention that's really important to you that you want to make sure that we don't forget about? That we want to know if we're off on something. So please don't hesitate to type in anything or unmute yourself. I think, like Daria said, you can hit *6 or you can unmute on the little red button on the bottom of your screen, either one.
Well, I'm seeing that somebody is hoping that the project will get done.
So do we.
They'll get some flood protection.
We're all for that. Let's do it.
I'd like to remind folks who are listening to this in the future that they're welcome to, provide their comments via the email that Ann has repeated several times, and I'm sure you're going to see it in an earlier slide. Please be sure to tell us. Thank you.
And I see a kudo given to Julie's historical reference of the river. I liked that too. I thought that was really
love that presentation. Julie does such a great job of contextualizing kind of the specific challenges of this river system and the specific things that impact the flood condition and what needs to be addressed. So kudos to Julie. And for that matter, since I'm giving kudos, I'm going to give kudos to Valley Water also for being really great partners and for, helping us through this complicated process. And, it's been a pleasure working with you already, and we're still at the beginning, so lots more to come.
Daria, if I could just add something, this is Director Barbara Keegan. If there's any groups or people that attendees think we should be doing outreach to, we really appreciate getting that input from you. Or conversely, if you can share the information that you may receive if you sign up via email.
Oh, thank you, Director Keegan. That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think you can go ahead and, I think the next slide is just a farewell slide or a open forum slide. So am I right about that?
I'm see that we have a comment in the chat, so I just added that. But
okay.
Great. All right. Somebody wants to see a focus on fish habitat, and someone else said, nice presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next slide is the public comments and questions. And since we haven't had anyone come off of mute yet, you know, we can break that streak now. Well, Director Keegan did, so good for you, ma'am. Or we can, you know, we'll give it a minute. People can, again, put stuff in the chat for kind of like open discussion and questions. If there's anything that we didn't already cover. And here is our project website. We will be placing our NEPA scoping document there once it's completed. We will be posting our draft integrated report, which is going to be that general reevaluation report combined with an environmental assessment, most likely, and that will be open for public comment period, and you'll be able to access it there. And if you want to email us and say, hey, here's my contact info, please shoot me a note when you make any updates to the website or make any releases for public comment, we can do that as well. So, as well as following up with written comments to this email address. And thank you, Carl. Carl put into the chat that he wants to acknowledge the hard work that the Army Corps staff put into this presentation. Appreciate that, and it was a group effort, so thank you to the whole team. Folks who didn't speak as well also contributed. So, all right, well, thank you so much. Are there any closing remarks that anyone would like to give? I know it's evening, and so I don't want to hold people longer than necessary, but, you know, we really appreciate everyone who participated and listened and heard this update from our team. We really have a great team, and we recognize that this is a complex and challenging study. This is not an easy thing to solve. If it were, it would have happened already. It would have already been built. But we are making our best efforts to see, you know, if there's a way that we can meet the objectives of this study within the core policies and guidelines. And so, you know, we like to be available. So if you do want to reach out in the future, please do so. And thank you, everyone, for your time.